Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. So excited to be talking with my good friend Jason today, and we're talking about how to stay relevant as a leader. It's a great coaching conversation. Before we jump into it, I want to remind you to check out churchboom.org. We've got so many great things to be a part of. Church Boom University, the Church Boom Network, just executive coaching, so many things that could help you as a leader. So make sure that you check that out. But hey, let's jump into the conversation with Jason. It's a great one. Man, always honored to talk with you. How can I help you today, man? What's on your mind?
Well, so in as far as coaching and talking a little bit about coaching, some of the questions that I had jotted down to ask you was, number one, I wanted to help, wanting to help develop our staff and our team, and I think to some degree you are aware of that. But what are, in your mind, what are some of the best practices for developing staff at churches?
Right. Yeah. I think. Excuse me. I think that. One of the things is, Jason, I think one of the most important things is to create rhythm. I feel like sometimes executive pastors, lead pastors, whoever that are running a staff that it's a little more organic, which I like the concept of organic, but I think there has to be a rhythm to it. Hey, we meet every other week, we meet once a week, whatever. But some way there has to be a rhythm, because what I find sometimes is the pastor or the executive pastor thinks, oh, I just check in with them. We kind of do it every other week or every third week. It just kind of whenever it kind of works out. And they feel on their side like, yeah, they love it. We have a great relationship. And then when I end up talking sometimes with those staff members, they interpret it as it's not that important to them. I'm not that important to them. My growth isn't that important to them. So we're interpreting it as, hey, we're just being organic because they're doing a great job and they love me and I love them. But they're interpreting it as, I don't feel like I'm that important. And so I don't think we have a true understanding of what it does when we are inconsistent. So I think being consistent is really important and creating a rhythm. That's number one. Secondly, I think that from a ministry standpoint, you have to create a function by which you have two things happening. One, that there's clarity of goals and objectives, and two, there's clarity of steps to those things. So similar to the 12-week year, I've talked about that before, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be that, but is there clear objectives of where do we think this ministry is going to be 6 months from now? And it's going to be here. Okay, well, how are you going to get there? I find it amazing that most of the staffs that I've talked to over the years through all the coaching that Church Boom does, and some of our executive coaches have talked to a bunch of different staff, and they come back to same answers all the time, is there's not a lot of clarity of where will we be 6 months from now? Tell me exactly where we're going to be 6 months from now. Yeah. Paint me the exact picture. Oh, we just want to grow. Very general. We just want to grow. We just want to add more leaders. We want to add more volunteers. That's not specific. I think you've heard it a million times. Goals have to be specific. The whole SMART thing, specific, measurable, achievable, all that. But is it specific? Like, tell me exactly where you want to be. So I think one of the things is consistency or rhythm, is another way of saying it, a cadence that's very, it doesn't miss. I mean, it doesn't say that it doesn't miss once a year, but it really never more than once or twice a year, but pretty much we're religiously on track. Secondly, I think it's important that there's a clear objective of where they're going and then a clear steps. I think that any pastor, a youth pastor, children's pastor, you should be able to walk into a church and say, where are you going to be 6 months, 9 months from now? And then be able to easily answer that. Like, oh yeah, we're going to be right here. This is our goal. This is our objective. We want to create this, create this, create this. I feel like otherwise a staff is simply getting by, not getting ahead. They're just simply like, oh, things are going great, man. We got a summer camp coming up. We've got this coming up. It's going good. And we as leaders, as long as it's somewhat growing, as long as parents or people aren't complaining, we're good. And I I don't think that it should be that way. So cadence, where are we going in the future, and then how are we going to get there? I would say the last portion is if the pastor, and I think you have this ability, if the pastor has the ability at times to coach the individual, and I'm not saying everybody has that ability, but at times if they have the ability to coach that person, I think it's great to have an underlying topic that we keep coming back to. That doesn't mean that we don't have the cadence and rhythm. That doesn't mean that we don't have where we're going to be 6 months from now. That doesn't mean that we don't have all that. They got to be making progress. You got to be moving forward. But underlying of that is insecurity, or they don't deal with conflict, or man, they're high people pleasers, and that's creating a huge problem for them. Like, I think there's something that you have to be coming back to so that you can be personally developing them. But if it only is that, then it's really high-level coaching, personal development, which is good, don't get me wrong, but they got to be making progress in their ministry.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, otherwise I think we're not being good stewards of the finances of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Because that's
very
what,
good.
People are giving so that their ministries will grow. They're not giving so that just this guy will just simply become better at conflicts. It's got to be a little bit more to that. So those are the things that I would think about. I think you do have the ability to be on both sides of that. I think you're one of those unique people that could.
Okay. Well, no, I appreciate that very much. The second thing that I have wondered is I've been in ministry, 30 years. In fact, this year is my 30th year. How from your thinking does a seasoned veteran of ministry stay relevant? Dealing with emerging generations when you go, I always thought I was relevant, and I had some time ago, somebody said, I think you're less relevant than you think you are. I'm like, well, thanks a lot.
Thanks for the encouragement. Jason, cassettes went out a long time ago.
So I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I never really thought a ton about it until I'm realizing, I'm not making as big a dent or impact as I thought I was making. So I was just curious if you had any insight in that area.
Yeah, well, I do think, obviously, I think that's a battle for everybody. Everybody's getting older. It doesn't matter who you are. The youngest person there that's teasing you is going to be right there soon. No one's escaping getting older. But I heard a guy say one time, "Hey man, if you don't want to be an old dog, learn new tricks." And an old dog can't learn new tricks is the old saying. It's like, well, if you don't want to be an old dog, then learn new tricks. I do think that you have to be current on your own personal development, your own ability to grow, your own ability to develop, your own leadership to develop. I do think that you shift a little bit in that, where I've watched guys not morph into the new chapter of their life. So they were a pastor here, they're a pastor here. 30 years, like you said, 30, 40 years later. But what happened was they didn't morph into it. I don't think someone that's 70 is just going to be relevant on what's happening to a 19-year-old kid. I think there's just going to be a gap there. What isn't a gap and what doesn't need to be a gap is the ability to speak leadership, truth, development, growing a ministry, overcoming conflict, dealing with leadership issues, how to raise up leaders. There is a grip of things that are relevant, that are cross-generational to relevancy. So someone would say, I think John Maxwell's 70, I don't know, I saw it somewhere, 75 or whatever he is now. It's kind of like, well, is he relevant? I don't think he knows the latest guy, the latest hip-hop artist. But can he speak to a 19-year-old on how to be a leader, how to develop your ministry, how to grow in ministry, how to handle conflict, how to raise up leaders? Like, could he talk to that all day long? Because he has stayed relevant with the topics that are general, no matter what generation it is. And I don't think that I don't think that we as pastors do that enough. I think that we're trying to create new success on old fumes. And, here we are 30 years later, and like, have we really learned that much more? Have we developed that much more? Can we speak to a group of youth pastors, not about who the latest hip hop artist is or whatever relevant is, but can we speak to them about, okay, here's how you grow a ministry. Here's how you develop leaders. Here's how you have a meeting. Here's how you create volunteers. Here's what people are looking for. Here's how you become more attractional as a leader. Yeah, if we have figured out how to do that. So I think our relevancy isn't as much culture to a degree, but it's more about principles.
Okay.
And I don't know if I don't think pastors do that enough. I really don't. And I challenge you to think like, okay, have I grown a lot in the last few years? Or am I giving out old fumes information to people like, well, let me tell you when I was a youth pastor. Let me tell you back in my day, we used to, like, if we're doing that, it's that you can't ride on that. What you have to be learning constantly is constantly developing, constantly learning. And believe me, I'm not the king of all this, but I was on a flight yesterday with a group of guys coming back. We were out in Nicaragua, and we were on a Convoy of Hope trip trying to help raise money to feed children around the world. One of the pastors goes by, and I'm working on my laptop, and he goes, "What are you working on?" I said, "I'm working on a new concept and a new talk." He goes, "Do you ever stop?" And I said, "Not if I'm going to stay out in front." And we ended up having a 5-minute conversation about that. And he just said, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, "You got to stay out in front, man. You're not getting younger. I'm not getting younger. You got to stay out in front. You got to be developing thoughts that other people are going to grab a hold of from age 19 to 59. They're like, man, I want to hear from this guy." I think that's how you stay relevant. You stay relevant on leadership. You stay relevant on development. You stay relevant on how to grow ministries.
Outstanding.
Yeah, because those things, you can cross any generation. That stuff still works.
Yeah.
When Maxwell speaks at 75, if you're a sharp 22-year-old, you're going, that's true. That's true. That's true. Yeah, you're not sitting there just he's not going to tell you what kind of music you should be playing, but he's going to tell you how to develop stuff, and you're going to think, that's exactly true, because he stays ahead.
That's great.
So that's what I would encourage. I encourage pastors to do that. And they if they don't have a rhythm to their own personal development, if they don't have a personal coach they're talking to, if they don't have thoughts that they're creating, if they're not learning, they're not developing. I mean, at a strong pace, that's how you become irrelevant. Because here's what happens. All of a sudden, it's like you're the 50-year-old guy. It's like, I don't feel like I'm relevant anymore. And then all of a sudden that 20-year-old goes on a crazy learning binge, now all of a sudden, I don't know, he's 30, you're 50 or whatever. And he's thinking, I'm kind of a little bit like, I know just as much as you, if not more.
Yeah. Wow.
You can't go there. You got to stay ahead. And that's why I told the guy, he's like, man, he goes, you constantly working on new stuff. I said, if I want to stay out in front, I have to. And
I love it.
You have to. And so anyway, that's what that's where I would focus.
You.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the last one of the is I was thinking about this time was most ministry and lead pastors have fixed income. I mean most people, unless they're entrepreneurs and they can develop beyond that. So the income in many cases isn't great. It can be adequate, and of course can put shoes on your kids and food on the table and all of that. But I was curious if from your learning, do you recommend investments, side hustles, and or the pursuit of more income outside of that yearly salary, and then what percentage? So would you recommend anything for a minister outside of his regular working hours, ministry time, and so forth? And then what percentage of time in your mind, in your learnings, is not excessive in pursuing other forms, not neglecting the work of ministry, not neglecting the task, but just was curious if you had any insights into that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I've always had stuff going on. Always been that kind of person on the side. I have a couple thoughts on that. It's hard to attract entrepreneurial leaders who aren't going to be entrepreneurial. So if you don't want leaders that are entrepreneurial, don't want leaders that can create, grow, develop, or always thinking of new things, then don't hire them. But when you don't hire them, you're getting that. So I personally don't have a problem with it. I don't know if it would be hard to put a time on it. I think that really comes down to the pastor. What is he okay with? What is he okay with? What's acceptable to him? What I would say is where I think it's easier for the individual as well as easier and palatable for the pastor is when it is somewhat running in the same lane. Okay, so here's a youth pastor that's a strong youth pastor, got a great thriving ministry, and I want to open up a store that makes hats, or whatever, and graphic hats. Okay. Or, hey, I opened up a landscaping company with my dad, and it's going to take all this time away. That's a little less palatable for the pastor. Now, when he flips over and says, look, I'm coaching youth pastors, and I'm also created a ministry that coaches teachers or does school assemblies. Now, all of a sudden, what he's doing is inside of somewhat the lane of what he's already doing. That's a lot easier for him. It's a lot less feeling like it's work and sideways energy, and probably more palatable to the pastor. Now, again, if I'm the pastor, I got to know, dude, if I'm paying your salary, I'm getting your best fruit, I'm getting your best thoughts, I'm getting your best energy. But if you want to do something different, I would say, hey, let me talk to you about that. If you want to do something on the side, what's that going to take? What lane is it in? Does it operate completely in a different lane, or does it operate somewhat in the same lane? I got to know, is it making this pastor better? Is it growing him? Is it developing him or her? I want to know that before I give the stamp of like, yeah, that sounds okay. Those are the thoughts. I think that it's up to the pastor, of course, no question about it. But after that's settled, staying in the same lane or in the same arena, I think is makes it easier for everyone.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. As long as you stay in the same lane. When you start going off to the side, that's where I think energy gets divided. And that's where it's, but you got to be careful, because people will follow their passions. And I've seen that with pastors where, man, I'm like, a pastor would say to me, hey, this guy kind of does a side hustle. And it seems like, the side hustle is more important than the church. And I'll end up talking to that staff member. And in one case, I remember talking to a staff member one time, and I told the guy, I said, do you know that every time I ask you how things are going, your answer is never about the church, it's about your side hustle? I said, I think that says where you're at. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you need to evaluate, where your heart is, because your first answer isn't about the church. Your first answer is always about your side hustle, which tells me where your heart is. And that's okay that your heart's there if that God's leading you there. But you just need to be honest, because you don't want to be a bad steward of the finances that God's giving you through that church while you're side hustling over here.
That's outstanding. Yeah. No, totally makes sense. And I think that for me anyway, that helps, because there are strengths in areas that I go, man, I could do something with that outside of, let's say, the church framework, but it would align with something like that. I guess I just haven't thought about it. I haven't thought about it that much. And anyway, I appreciate that insight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, again, always got to be the approval of the pastor, but if it stays in the same lane, it's always helpful. When it gets out of that lane, I think that's where problems can occur. And I always tell the person, watch their passion, because if their passion ends up being, like I said with this guy, every time I ask him, he never answers about the church.
Yeah.
Ever. He never answers about the church. It ends up coming in second or third in the conversation, but I'm like, I think that's saying something, that it's never the first thing you said. And he didn't notice it until I pointed it out. And he's like, you're right. I never thought about that. And so it's something for his passion. But anyway, man, anything else you want to chat about today?
Nope. I just wanted to pitch some of those thoughts that had I've wrestled with for a little bit of time in my mind. I thought if you would at least speak to that, that would be pretty helpful. And anyway, that for me, very insightful, Chris, and very grateful.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, always great talking to you, Jason, man. Sure do appreciate you, buddy.
Yeah. God bless you, Chris.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Man, I love that conversation with Jason and just love talking about staying relevant as a leader. Want to remind you to check out churchboom.org. So many things that could help you grow as a leader, things that you could be a part of. So make sure you check that out. Just know that we're always rooting for you, cheering for you, and we're here to help however we can.